Welcome to this module within the Policy Development course, this module titled Legal Issues and Other Policy Considerations. I'm Bonnie McEwen, the Northwest District Consultant with the State Library. You're welcome to contact me with any follow-up questions regarding this class. Refer back to this slide for my contact information, or you can find me from the Contact Us link on the State Library's website. We'll begin this module by looking at legal issues regarding developing policies, and follow that with a look at some important but often overlooked policy topics to consider. I'll have suggestions for looking at the policies that boards approve as an opportunity for public education, and we'll finish up with ideas for a policy revision schedule. Let's begin with legal considerations. How can library boards and management do their best work to ensure that the policies being adopted can also be enforced? Well, first, public library boards have to comply with current statutes, with current local, state, and federal law. For example, public library boards in Iowa must comply with Iowa's open meetings law. They have to hire according to the equal opportunity employment law. They have to ensure that the library upholds patron confidentiality. Policy regulations, as explained in an earlier module, have to be reasonable, with reasonable consequences. Policy should be clear, applied to all users fairly, and when the topic is sufficiently complicated, library boards are well advised to consult with their city attorney. Let's take each of these points in turn. Two good examples of library policies that must comply with local statutes are shown on this slide. On the left, Iowa Open Meetings Law, detailed in Chapter 21 of the Iowa Code, includes public library boards as one of those governmental bodies that must comply with the Open Meetings Law. I encourage library boards to reference this state law in their own bylaws. It helps to inform and instruct all trustees that they must comply with this state law. On the right, Iowa Code Chapter 22.7 speaks to the fact that public library circulation records are considered confidential records in Iowa. Public libraries must uphold patron privacy, pledging that any link between a person's identity and what they've checked out of the library is a matter of confidentiality. Circulation records should only be released by the custodian of the record, typically that's the library director, and typically only upon a lawful subpoena. Library boards should reference this Iowa Code Chapter 22.7 inside their own circulation policy. More detail about both of these Iowa statutes can be found inside the Iowa Code online. Let's look next at the second test of whether a policy is legally enforceable, and that's whether the policy regulations and the corresponding consequences are in fact reasonable. This circulation policy from LeClaire Public Library is a good example of reasonable regulations and reasonable consequences. LeClaire's policy reads that circulation and some remote access privileges will be blocked for patrons with $5 or more in fines, with 5 or more items overdue, with long-standing overdue materials or billed items. LeClaire's policy goes on to say that circulation and other access privileges will be blocked when a patron's library card expires. An expired card may be renewed once the patron's address is verified. Again, these are reasonable and typical consequences for lost and overdue items. A third test of whether a policy is legally enforceable is whether the policy is clear and unambiguous. This circulation policy from Waterloo Public Library is a good example of setting up clear expectations for how long library materials can be checked out. Books, audiobooks have a 3-week checkout with renewals allowable. A TV series on DVD checks out for 1 week with renewal allowable. For magazines, the new issue can be checked out for 1 week, but with no renewal. However, older issues of magazines check out for 3 weeks with renews allowable. Again, this is a good example of setting up clear expectations for people to know about when checking out materials from the library. A fourth test of whether a policy is legally enforceable is whether it is being applied fairly and without discrimination. A strong example of this principle comes to us from the American Library Association. For decades, ALA has been at the forefront of guiding public libraries across the country in developing policies and practices that uphold equal access to information without regard to race, age, or gender. There is a tendency to limit library access to minors. But minors have First Amendment rights too, and ALA provides the best in national advocacy regarding a minor's right to library materials. This text showing on this slide are interpretations of the Library Bill of Rights. The first is a statement on policies for schools and minors' rights. The second is a statement about minors and online activity. Learn more about these and other intellectual freedom documents at ALA. And be sure to reference these intellectual freedom statements inside your library policies. Lastly, when policy topics are sufficiently complicated, or if a policy topic has never been addressed before, then library boards are well advised to consult with the city attorney. This work of developing sound public policy is made easier when library managers and boards reach out to city attorneys for legal advice. Some topic discussions and decisions are strengthened with coordination among the library's most likely partners, namely city administrators, mayors, councils, and city attorneys. This example is thanks to Brittany Jacobs at Burlington Public Library. Their board and staff looked to revise the library's statement of concern. Now, a statement of concern is a form that is often given to people who take issue with items in the library's collection. Brittany writes that the final expert we had weigh in on this policy was the city attorney. The city, the trustees, the library staff were all thankful for his insight, and we feel confident in our new policy as it helps to give scaffolding to the work that we carry out. Again, this is a good example of bringing in that level of expertise. The link on this slide takes you to the actual Statement of Concern policy that was finally adopted by the Burlington Public Library Board in December of 2023. For more information about legal issues surrounding library policies, I'll refer you to this resource on the State Library's website. Mandy Easter with the State Law Library has compiled frequently asked legal questions into a searchable database. These are legal-related questions that Iowa libraries have asked and Mandy has answered in a Q&A format, posting this collection on our website. From personnel issues to fundraising questions, from board authority to city government responsibility, visit this important resource on the State Library's website. Again, this is Library Law FAQs. Let's circle back to standards for a few minutes and look again at standard number 7, which requires at a Tier 1 level that libraries adopt 4 required policies: circulation, collections, personnel, and internet use. Standard number 7 and about 80 more are found in the publication showing here, In Service to Iowa, Public Library Standards. This is an important publication for library boards, for directors, and staff to know about and to turn to. It's a publication of the State Library. Now, standard number 9 is not required, but it does encourage library boards to adopt additional policy topics. A few are shown here on the slide, like a policy on bulletin boards and displays. You might have policies about the use of your meeting rooms, and there can be many others. As you turn to your own library's policy manual, you'll discover which of these additional policy topics your board has addressed and which ones they haven't yet. The next few slides offer examples of some additional policy topics to consider. Not all of them. I've just chosen to highlight just a few. So I'll lead off with this one because, frankly, it's a pet peeve of mine. I do believe that public libraries need to do a better job, a more consistent job of addressing when the library closes for holidays. Now, remember, I spoke just minutes ago about the need for policies to be clear and unambiguous. All libraries should clearly state which holidays the library will observe throughout the year, and Grimes Public Library has done just that. They decided and documented in policy, in writing, on their website, which holidays the library observes, so that the community knows well in advance when the library is expected to be closed. Here is a year at a glance chart, again, determined well in advance, showing which holidays Grimes Library will observe in 2024. This is so simple to do, and it's so important to do, so that these holiday decisions are not decided days before the event. They're instead decided an entire year before the event. These holidays should be decided for the entire calendar year. You'll note on this page that Grimes Library is normally open on Sundays, but not on Easter Sunday, not on Mother's Day or Father's Day. Grimes also shows 2 days that the library will be closed for staff in-service training. All of this, a year-at-a-glance calendar, informs the public about the library's expected closings well in advance, and posted on the library's website is ideal. Now, here's how Grimes Library Board has addressed closing for inclement weather. This is a more subjective decision. It's not as clear-cut as deciding upon the holidays, but how to handle inclement weather closings is still an important thing to talk about and to decide. And the decision is actually made easier when the library takes its cue from other agencies. So as you can see here, Grimes Library relies on information about inclement weather closings by checking with the Iowa DOT, by checking with the Grimes Community School District, and by checking with the Grimes City Hall. Now, in my experience, mid-sized to larger libraries have social media policies, but that's a topic not as often found in small town libraries. And yet, Small town libraries are just as active on social media as larger cities are. So this example from Sibley Public Library serves up a good example of a social media policy. It's a topic that's not very commonly addressed, and it's also a good example of the philosophy behind having and using social media. Sibley's statement says that through the library's social media messages, we are fulfilling our mission to inspire lifelong learning, to promote new resources, to raise cultural awareness. Much of the content relates to libraries, books, authors, and the book publishing industry. Definitely a good example of the why or the philosophy behind Sibley Library's use of social media. Now, here's a good example of a programming policy. There's another topic that's not very commonly found, but it's found at Marion Public Library. A programming policy is going to speak to what goes into the library providing public programming, the whys, the hows. Marion has done it very well with a very strong philosophy statement that reads, "The purpose of library programming is to promote early literacy, a lifelong love of reading and learning, to foster cultural awareness, civic engagement, and to share local talent, knowledge, and expertise." A programming policy. Now, remember, as we circle back for a minute to standard number 7 that requires those 4 written required policies for circulation, collection, personnel, and internet use, that standard goes on to say that all policies are available to staff and for public inspection. So we'll talk about staff access in just a minute, but for now, let's talk about making library policies available for public inspection. That sounds formal, but it really is simply taking those public-facing policies, those policies that community members really most need to know, like applying for library cards, using the library's Wi-Fi or the library's public computers, accessing bridges and other digital products. Those policies are logical ones. They're considered public facing, and they're the logical ones to post on the library's website, with explanations as logical things to provide people via flyers or fact sheets available in the library. Since the 1930s, public libraries across the country have endorsed the principles of intellectual freedom, starting with the Library Bill of Rights, continuing with the freedom to read and the freedom to view, and many more corresponding intellectual freedom statements, all found on ALA's website, the American Library Association. These documents are really the cornerstones of a public library's purpose: to provide equal access to a broad range of thought and opinion through the library's physical and digital collections. Now, library boards and managers and staff know this, but to put this into the context of public education, how many of your community members do you think are familiar with your library's support of intellectual freedom? How many in city government are familiar with the library's stance on intellectual freedom? How many in county government? Likely not many people outside of immediate library circles, which makes incorporating these documents into library policy so important. And it makes sharing these documents so important. Put them out on the library's website, then it becomes a public education. This example from Marshalltown Public Library is also public education, and actually it raises public awareness because it's a great example of promoting the library's Friends group. Now, friends groups are often a small percentage of the population as a whole, and like many things surrounding library service, there may be many people that are just not aware that there even is a friends group, not aware of their projects, not sure how they themselves might join such a group to contribute their own time and talent. The Friends of Marshalltown Public Library has this wonderful page on their website promoting the Friends Group. And it says about the Friends Group that the Friends of Marshalltown Public Library contribute to the library by providing funding for new materials, funding for programming for youth through adults, and running the annual book sale. Anyone can become a friend of the library at any time during the year. Marshalltown goes a bit further in promoting their friends group by including a very visible Donate with PayPal button on this page. It's a very good example of promoting library service, in this case, a friends group, in raising awareness, and certainly it will lead to increased promotion and public education. Sioux City Public Library has been defining patrons and defining service for decades. I want to showcase Sioux City's model because there's lots to be learned from this. On their website, they've clearly defined who is eligible for a full-service Sioux City Library card. They spell out ages, residency, they address open access borrowers. Now, what you see here on this screen is an abbreviated version of the full circulation policy that the board adopted. The full circulation policy more completely defines patron eligibility, patron types who can receive a full service library card. What you see here is more of a promotional piece. But one more note about this as a practice for public education is the last line on the slide. This one simple declarative sentence that reads, Sioux City Public Library is funded through city property tax dollars. That is an important, significant statement that any public library can replicate. And it's an important statement because it leads to improved taxpayer education. I like this because of the FAQ approach. It comes to us from Waukesha Public Library in Wisconsin, and it's a friendly way of relaying policy information because the answers to people's frequently asked questions are actually policy decisions that have been made. Now, it's still good to post your library policies on your website, but this kind of an FAQ display is just a really nice visual way, a friendly way of sharing policy information and doing public education at the same time. Standard number 7, requiring that the board adopts those 4 written policies for circulation, collection, personnel, and internet use, requiring that those policies be available to the staff and to the public, goes on to require that policies should be reviewed at least every 3 years. The other points on the slide are mine. My suggestions for a revision process. Don't attempt to examine and revise all policies in 2 or 3 board meetings. That's a lot to tackle. It's much easier to schedule various topics throughout that 3-year cycle. Be sure to date every revision and try this trick. Try bringing a year at a glance calendar to the process. Here's an example. This is a practice that I've long been encouraging library boards to do. And that is to use a year-at-a-glance calendar to plot those things that the board needs to discuss at meetings throughout the year. Using a board business calendar leads to consistency and to a systematic approach to reviewing policies. For example, the board could target April as the month when it wants to review the circulation policy. It could target June as the month to review the collection policy. And you can see here some other things tossed in there. You could target 2 months specifically to conduct board education. You could target a month to do the director's performance evaluation. Maybe in December, the board will review the strategic plan every year. February, I think, is a wonderful month of the year for the board to look ahead to see whose terms are due to expire in June and to have that conversation. Whose terms are about to expire, ask those people if they are willing to be reappointed to the board or if they're ready to step down and have other people step into that role. Bringing a year-at-a-glance business calendar to the business of the board gives the board a collective memory. It makes agenda development from month to month much easier, and it gives the board time to plan and reflect and adjust as needed. Now, a frequent question that comes from hearing about policy development is this: should staff procedures be pulled out from the rest of the policy handbook and kept separately? I think yes. I think it is more convenient and more practical to have a procedures manual readily accessible for the staff, filed apart from the formal policies that the board approves. Procedures are staff work routines, so it is practical that they are kept somewhere where staff can easily find them and get to them. Filing procedures in a 3-ring binder is fine. It's pretty commonly done. But the more and more things in our lives are saved to the cloud, you might want to consider using cloud-based products like Google Docs or Microsoft OneNote, or even Live Binders. Live Binders is fun. It's a fun website that allows you to create digital binders with the same look and feel of the familiar 3-ring binders that we probably all have sitting on our shelves. Live Binders makes the documents easy to access, share, and update from anywhere. But yes, pull out your procedures, which are staff work routines. Pulling them out, keeping them separate from the rest of the board-approved policies is a practical thing to do. In addition to the policy examples from the Iowa libraries that we've looked at in this and previous modules, the next 2 slides offer 2 authoritative sources for even more sample policy topics. Back to ALA, the American Library Association, the oldest and largest library association in the world. It dates back to 1876. Among many things, one crucial role for ALA is to provide a national and unified defense of intellectual freedom. And defending intellectual freedom is a critical advocacy role at the local level. It's a critical role for library boards, and it does require thoughtful public policy. Do explore ALA's website to access intellectual freedom statements and interpretations that your library board can endorse. And this source for sample policies is thanks to a partnership between the Colorado State Library and ARSL, the Association for Rural and Small Libraries. This is a compilation of policy topics contributed by library practitioners, with topics including working with volunteers, using library meeting rooms, and borrowing wireless hotspots, and lots more. So visit the CLIC site, which stands for the Colorado Library Consortium. The link on the slide will take you there. So to wrap up this policy development course, through 4 individual modules, we've talked about thoughtful public policies that need to be developed through study, input, and discussion, involving the library director, the staff, the board, always considering the safety and welfare of your community residents. Thoughtful public policies should establish service regulations and rules of conduct that are easily understood by staff and patrons alike. Thoughtful public policy must be consistent with local, state, and federal laws. And finally, thoughtful public policies must ensure equitable treatment for all ages and races, providing a framework for the consistent delivery of services free of discriminatory practices. This concludes this module within the Policies course, Legal Issues and Other Policy Considerations. Good luck as you continue with the endorsement program, and be sure to reach out to us at the State Library with any questions.